This is IATA.com. Primetime sports all the time.
And now from Times Square, crossroads of the World Wide Web, and sponsored in part by the Office of National Drug Control Policy, it's the Wrestling Observer Live with Dave Meltzer.
How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling. We're going to have Tony Jones, who is a independent wrestler who's worked for UPW, All Pro Wrestling. He's worked in Japan. He's had tryouts with WWF, WCW. Works for Urban Wrestling as well. So we'll talk to him about those various promotions. He'll be up in about half an hour, and we're going to talk about all of the latest wrestling news. Of course, we have Brian Alvarez here for the next 2 hours. Brian, how are you today?
I'm doing good.
That's good. One thing, do you know what's going on as far as the lack of replays of the Women of Wrestling pay-per-view?
I have no idea. Were there supposed to be replays and there weren't?
Yeah. I think they said that they canceled them due to technical difficulties, but that's actually not the reason. Apparently, they were canceled because of so many complaints about the show and unprecedented. Now, think about this. Think about all of the pay-per-views that we've seen, and how many of them have actually had replays canceled. I can only think of
canceled by the cable company or canceled by the promotion.
This one I heard was canceled by what was it? By I think DirecTV canceled it.
Huh.
But I've heard of DirecTV canceled one of the UFC pay-per-views because a replay of it. There was one with the Kevin Randleman Page. The Kevin Randleman Page for his own main event that actually didn't take place. Actually, I wish they had canceled the replay of the one that did, because that was a horrible fight. But the first time when Kevin Randleman slipped and hit his head and there was no main event, they felt that since there was no main event that they weren't going to show the replay since that had been advertised, which was actually too bad in a sense because they had a hell of an undercard that night.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that was one, and then the only other one I can think of was the Owen Hart one, which was actually, the WWF's decision that they showed one replay of it, and then they canceled all the future replays.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, just wondering what was
just complaints from fans that it was hideous and they didn't want to put up with that anymore?
I think it was more than that.
Money back?
I don't know. I was wondering if you heard. No, but I just know that it was canceled due to something. Let's see. What do you think of SmackDown?
Maybe it was technical wrestling difficulties.
Yeah, but think of how many pay-per-views have had that.
I know.
Yeah.
Did they have a Heroes of Wrestling replay? I think they did.
Yes, they did.
They did.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
And think of some of those shows we've seen from WWF and WCW, especially WCW in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been some totally unwatchable shows. Anyway, speaking of absolutely nothing, right before we went on the air, I was catching up on EMLL Wrestling, and, even though I almost never get to watch it, I'm going to be really sad if they take that off the air because, there's something about it I really enjoyed. I just was really enjoying it. I was watching Blue Panther, and I'm watching 10 minutes of a Blue Panther match, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy's like the greatest worker almost in the entire business. He's like the best mat. He blows Dean Malenko away on the mat. He was doing high flying. He ain't anywhere near the best high flyer or brawler or anything like that. But anyway, I don't know what that has to do with anything. But I guess after I watched SmackDown and then EMLL, and I thought SmackDown was a good show, and then I watched EMLL, and it was like, technical, just from a wrestling standpoint, it was way better than SmackDown.
And you never feel like you're being treated like an idiot.
Well, that's because I don't know the language very well. I know it a little bit, but yeah. So I can't be insulted by the announcers because I don't know what they're saying.
The announcers or the angles or anything.
Well, they do traditional angles.
Are here too.
Yeah, well, that's stipulations are here too. They've done some they did that really stupid angle with a pig last year, so they've done their dumb angles, but much less than like all the other companies.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you the other thing. Yesterday I was talking about how I was interested in watching the XFL on Saturday because of Ross and Ventura. After watching SmackDown last night and
reading the Ross report,
I have no interest in it whatsoever now. Because it's just like, okay, they're gonna do a work angle, big deal, I mean, it's like they're already so desperate that they're doing work announcer angles in the second week. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it was really sad. I mean, I thought that kind of like an inside thing because they don't like each other. But now it's like they're trumpeting, oh, these guys don't like each other. And it's like, oh, God, they're scripting the announcers. They're telling them, go at each other, for fun, so.
That would still be interesting, though. Wouldn't be as interesting as if it was not planned, but...
Yeah, but they're going to work out the spots ahead of time, so what does it matter?
Well, probably most of them, but you may hear something.
Well, we'll hear something,
You may hear something, I will not.
Yeah, that's true, because you're not going to watch it anyway. But it's like now remember the Jim Ross, Vince McMahon angle, which actually I thought was fairly entertaining, and then just dropped it cold about 3 weeks in, a couple years back.
Maybe Ross can go build his own desk. Remember he did that?
Yes, that was when Russo was.
Grill and a,
yeah, when Russo was trying to. It was when Russo was trying to get rid of him and portray him as this nutcase, and so everybody would embrace Michael Cole as the sane announcer on Raw, which didn't work.
It didn't work at all.
Hey, how did you like that number last night that watched the XFL?
What did they say last night? I read that one article where they said 35 million or something like that.
54 million.
Wow, yeah. That is more than double how many people they registered to vote.
I think it's more than. Oh God. I think they registered 150,000 people to vote, but they claimed 1 million, right?
Yeah, 1 million.
Yeah. Well, 54 million is a lot more than that. I think 54 million is more than watched Friends and is probably about what watched Friends and Survivors combined last night.
Yep, that's a big number.
Now okay, if Friends and Survivor are both going to finish in the top 6 or 7 shows, and the XFL finished number 30, how could XFL have more viewers than both those shows combined? It's the new math.
Yeah.
It's the same math they've been using most of it.
Same that Linda's been using.
They've all been using that math. Last night, SmackDown did a 4.0 rating, which is the same as it did the week before with tons of hype. It did that same rating this week with no hype. And with no hype, personally to me, I thought SmackDown was best American TV show in several weeks. Agree?
Yeah, probably was, actually. I'm trying to think of any other good shows. I can't even think of any.
Yeah, because most of the shows haven't been good for the last few weeks. I think that's one of the reasons I'm saying that.
One of the things I got to say, too, is I don't know if there was just a lot of really, really horrible wrestling last year, what the deal is, but I have found myself more and more writing the term, this was better than I expected. It seems like I write it on every show, and last night, Rock and Big Show was better than I expected. It was really good, but I was expecting just this absolutely hideous match, and it actually turned into something that I could watch. Never watch again, but I could watch it that one evening.
The people were really into it.
Yeah.
Told its little story. He worked as hard as he could.
Yeah, he did.
He did. I mean, he's very limited and he's too heavy. That bump where he went through the table looked so clumsy, but he worked as hard as he could. He was not lazy at all. I thought they had a couple.
About a Big Show. He kind of looked a little flabby last night, and I was thinking maybe he really does weigh 414. But when he was doing his diet, maybe he just lost a bunch of muscle. You know what I mean?
He looked
gigantic. As opposed to
me.
Losing a bunch of fat and keeping the muscle and actually looking better. Maybe he just lost a lot of muscle. Maybe he was just on a starvation diet, lost a bunch of muscle. Now he just looks big and flabby, but he actually weighs less.
I don't know the mystery of the Big Show's weight, but he looked enormous to me last night.
Oh yeah, he just looked huge. And he's next to Rock, who they always say is 280.
They say 270. I don't think Rock's anywhere near 270 though. I think Rock's closer to 250.
And
I think he's 6'4", 255 maybe.
Okay, and Show looked a lot bigger than 150 pounds heavier.
Show looked huge, just gigantic. Yeah. I liked, except for one spot, which actually I got to bring this up because I couldn't stop laughing. In the Helms of Jericho, and they had a good match like they pretty much always do. Stephanie McMahon did the worst choke over the ropes in the history of pro wrestling. She grabbed Jericho and she started choking him on the ropes and pulled him so far that she's choking his belly on the ropes and holding down. I couldn't stop.
Hold his neck.
I know, that was the funniest thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I don't know, like, if I was a wrestling fan who didn't like football, okay, I'm not sure I'm going to like XFL football anyway, but, like I says, Brian, don't you feel like it's annoying now, all the XFL references on the WWF show? It's like you're just bombarded with them, and you can't get away from them.
The thing is, I have the fast forward button because I tape Raw and SmackDown, and they had like a long video package last night on XFL, and I was showing about 1 second. And the one thing I did watch, though, I did have to watch Lawler trying to explain the announcer's change.
Oh, was that hilarious?
But everything else I just fast-forwarded right through. It was like, why even watch this?
Yeah, but what about all those Vince cutaways? Like, every cutaway he brings up, 2 undefeated teams and this and that,
Well, yeah, I know. It's usually about 5 minutes into the show, I'm sick of the XFL.
Well, there's going to be a lot of it. This is going to be interesting. We actually had a poll here on the ratings for the XFL. Where is it? This is for, what do you think the rating's going to be? 4.0 to 4.99, 11%. 5.0 to 5.99, 19%. 6.0 to 6.99, 32%. 7.0 to 7.99, 26%. And 8.0 or greater, 13%. What do you think? You got any kind of number in your head?
Oh, I say between 6 and 7.
I say between 7 and 8.
Okay.
I say mid-7, so we'll see how that turns out. The poll for today is, which of these look at this. Which of these products would have the best chance to make it in the United States on pay-per-view? A Pride, which has run several shows on pay-per-view in the United States, most of which have been good, some of which haven't. EMLL, which actually debuts March the 30th on pay-per-view in the United States, and did actually maybe the best pay-per-view of the year last year in Mexico. That first one was awesome. C, AAA, D, New Japan, and E, none have a chance. Okay. What other stuff? This some Ross Report stuff. Shawn Michaels, Al Snow, and Rhino all signed multi-year contracts, so we'll be seeing Michaels on TV in a prominent role maybe within a week, maybe next Monday.
Yeah.
Rhino, no start date set for Rhino, whenever they can figure out what to do. China's Book is number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. We'll have more on China's Book in just a second.
Yeah, the greatest line in reference to that, whether it was fiction or nonfiction.
Oh, you like that? Yeah, I don't know which list it's on. But I got more on that China Book. And basically Ross was praising a lot of people, and he said that he should work harder on the light heavyweight division and push Taz. I don't know why, that just cracked me up.
I know.
I mean, just like,
What do the fans want to hear this week?
Yeah. that we all know is never going to happen.
Yep.
And then he put over the fact that he and Jesse Ventura don't get along. It's like, all right, thanks, guys. You killed my interest in the whole product. Let's see. The WWF's getting all kinds of negative hype, negative ink today and yesterday for putting Matt Vasgersian on the B game and Jim Ross on the A game. And nobody has mentioned that one of the reasons why they made that decision was because Jim Ross did a better job announcing than Matt Vasgersian. I mean, that's the reality of, and also I think because they decided that they needed an angle and Ross and Ventura makes a better angle. So it's those two reasons. I guess for the angle reason, the critics probably have a right to be mad because it's like you're turning the commentary of the game into a wrestling angle, which in fact they are. So, that's valid. But it's Vince McMahon's football. Of course they're going to do that. And then, they were the big thing was that Matt Vasgersian has done baseball and Jim Ross has done wrestling. But you know what? Jim Ross, neither of them is football. And Jim Ross knows more football than Matt Vasgersian, so it doesn't matter that Matt Vasgersian did baseball, which is a real sport, and Jim Ross did wrestling, which is a contrived version of a sport. And the other thing was
called the same way that a real sport would be, basically. Maybe a little
similar
more
to.
Over the top and
he's more over the top.
Lying, but
and
misidentifying
yeah, but
moves.
the XFL announcing is going to be closer to wrestling because it's going to be constant lying.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times are we going to hear about how these players are playing it for the love of the game and how they have more passion than the NFL players? And it's like, they're playing it so they can get an NFL tryout.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting, the Sports Illustrated article, which I read after we went off the air yesterday. I mean, there were no bones about it. I mean, they were saying that, any player in the XFL after the season, they can go to an NFL camp. There's no long-term deals or anything with these players. So, and they basically said that the top players, they're probably going to get a look-see at the camp. Let me see what else. The other thing, it was an LA Times story that I saw, and their thing was that NBC had hired Vasgersian, but it was Vince McMahon who dumped him, and they were saying that, like, how is NBC allowing Vince McMahon, you know, the latitude to, you know, like, interfere with their sports announcing? And it's like, this is not traditional sports. This is an entertainment product that happens to be a football game. And Vince McMahon is in complete control, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't do it, because Vince McMahon never does anything he's not in complete control of. So, there's going to be a lot of people who learn to dislike Vince McMahon in the next very short period of time, I think, in the traditional sports media. Before we head to a break, I was going to read this thing here, which is from Christy Wolf, who some of you may remember as Asia for a very brief period in WCW, and she read China's book. And this was yesterday. She had these comments, some of which are kind of silly, which you'll notice, and some of which are less silly. Anyway, some of which are right on, as a matter of fact, some of which aren't. Anyway, recently I've been inundated with emails asking me to respond to the negative comment China makes about me in her book. I didn't even remember it. That's how
I didn't either, actually.
Well, she probably did. I think she ripped on pretty much every woman in wrestling. And, you know, Asia, you know, let's face it, Asia was a takeoff on China. No doubt about it. Okay, I haven't really thought about responding because I felt as though it wouldn't be the classy thing to do until now. It's still not the classy thing to do, but she's going to do it. She took a pot shot at me, so why not voice my opinion? At first, when I started wrestling for WCW, I didn't even know who China was. They all did. Don't you love these people who come into wrestling and they don't even, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She comes into wrestling. I mean, not that China's some, like, great figure, but if you know anything about wrestling, you know who China is. So someone's like...
Kurt Angle.
Kurt Angle didn't know anything. He never grew up watching pro wrestling. Okay, but that's a totally different thing. I mean, Kurt Angle came in Olympic gold medals. They came after him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I guess they did after her, too, you know, because she was a bodybuilder. Okay, anyway. A few weeks passed, and I soon learned who she was. I thought, here's a girl with a great muscular body who looks great in the ring. You know, she had it half right. I felt as though maybe this is a turning point for heavily muscled women, hoping that society might finally accept us. You know, I think society would accept them a lot better if they didn't, like, take male hormones to look like that. You know what I mean? I don't think that anyone has anything against, like, very, very fit, muscular women that don't take drugs. I mean, there's probably some, but, like, really athletic women that are, you know, kind of on the muscular side, but they're not all roided up. I don't think that society's that negative about them anymore.
Like those Muscle Magazine swimsuit issues? Those things sell like crazy.
The Muscle Magazine, yeah, but those are that's just boob jobs and steroids.
Yeah, but they're not.
But
they don't look like China.
No, it's not that heavily mannish look, or the old China look.
Yeah,
the old China look. Anyway, I'm gonna finish this because we'll go to a break and I'll finish this Christy Wolf stuff, who's actually the wife of Dale Torborg. For those who, I think everyone knows that anyways. But anyway, I don't even know what that matters. We're gonna have Tony Jones up in just a couple of minutes. I want to remind everyone also of the schedule for the next 2 weeks. We've got some interesting guests. Wednesday, the Honky Tonk Man, who has actually been heavily requested, finally getting him on the show. Thursday, Rick Bassman will be back from Ultimate Pro Wrestling, so we'll be talking about what's going on there. Friday, Jim Herd, the man who was the first vice president of World Championship Wrestling under Turner, and we'll get his perspective on what is basically the sale of the company that he first headed, and the fact that all that criticism he got, which he deserved, and all the money that they lost more money last year than triple, I think, the amount of money they lost in 3 years under him. But anyway, we'll talk more about that. And then the week after, we got Coney Monk from the Dallas Morning News, Bad News Allen, one of the favorite guests, back. And on the 23rd, which is the day of the UFC pay-per-view, we got Bobby Heenan. So anyway, you can mark those dates down on the calendar, and we're going to get back to Christy Wolf. Okay. Christy Wolf, who did not know who China was when she started in wrestling. He goes, but anyway, a few weeks passed. I soon learned who she was. I thought, here's a girl with a great muscular body who looks great in the ring. I felt as though maybe this is a turning point for heavily muscled women, hoping that society might finally accept us. I say this because I myself am an IFBB professional bodybuilder and competitor. I have competed in physique competitions since 1993. Society is far more accepting of women with muscles now. However, now I have a bad taste in my mouth trying to set a new standard that women with muscles can be powerful and beautiful at the same time. Yes, they can be, but maybe not her. At present, I feel let down somewhat. Here's an individual who I thought could be a great role model for heavily muscled women wrestlers. Unfortunately, to my surprise, China seems lacking a major part of her well-being. Maybe someday when her feet come back to earth, she'll realize how lucky she got by being in the right place at the right time. China did not get hired because of her wrestling skills. No, China, you got hired for your Amazon status, same as me. Fact is, China, you need to stop believing your own hype. Vince McMahon made you a star. Joni didn't make China. The McMahons made China. Vince gave you the world. You say you paid your dues. What, 3 years? Try telling that face-to-face to Medusa, another woman who you ripped in your book. Now, you know what? This is actually a pretty good point here, to an extent. Here is a woman who paved the way for women like you and me in this business. She didn't quite, but she did learn more. I mean, like, Medusa did, she did train to be a real woman wrestler, much, much harder than China ever did, obviously. A woman who's wrestled for 15 years, she can wrestle circles around you. She would beat you in a shoot fight any day of the week. As a matter of fact, so could I. Anytime you want, no cameras needed. Don't you hate that? That's like one of my pet peeves right there. Yeah. Medusa may very well be able to beat China in a shoot fight, and she may very well not. And it's a totally irrelevant point. I mean, it is a relevant point that Medusa trained went to Japan and trained real hard and learned a lot of stuff. And I don't think Medusa was ever, and she was never a great worker, but she tried and learned. And for China to rip Medusa, compared to her as far as in the ring talent, I mean, that's a pretty fair, that's pretty unfair, I guess. But as far as who would want to fight, who cares? Also, I think you might want to thank someone who works right along with you. You think you're the only girl who wrestles guys? Go back and look at some old WCW tapes of Jacqueline and Kevin Sullivan. Oh, I don't want to think about this. She was beating up guys long before you stepped foot in a ring. She's another one who paved the way for you to be a superstar. Actually, I don't think any of these women wrestlers paved the way for trying to be a superstar. I mean, I don't think any of them did. Certainly not Jacqueline, but that's another story. Also, the nerve of you to bury Bill Goldberg. He's a great athlete with a huge heart. He's done so much for kids, and isn't that what life is really about? Supporting our real heroes. Yes, I'm talking about sick and dying children who wrestle for their lives every day. Bill knows the most important aspect of being a superstar is for the kids. It's not about ourselves. China, you need to stop living in a fantasy world and live in reality. You're at minute 13 and a half of your 15 minutes of fame. You better enjoy what you got. I wish I still had a job at WCW, but I don't. I didn't get the lucky breaks and the push you got, and now I'm even beginning to wonder if all the rumors are true that you blocked me getting into the WWF. After all, what are you worried about? Afraid of a little competition? Christy Wolf. Now, I don't know that China had anything to do with her not getting into the WWF because, quite frankly, why would the WWF want her? But that's another story. But I thought the Medusa comments were kind of there was some truth to those. Yeah. Any more comments on that, Brian?
I just want to find out what China said about her in the book. Okay. Apparently, we read this book really fast.
We both read it really fast. I couldn't. This is from. I was listening to the advertisement for IATA on the XFL. The opening line is, Saturdays on NBC, the XFL finally hits the fan. Is it just me, or do they equate their product to excrement? That was pretty funny. Let's see. There's someone who's asking for Abdul the Butcher to be a guest on the show. No. And
there's only so many questions. Well, I guess there's a lot of questions, but...
No. I saw an interview that RF Video did with Abdul the Butcher when they went to his House of Ribs Chinese restaurant. And it was like the most boring interview that I've ever heard in my life. And we've had some good shows and we've had some bad shows. And the ones that... I don't want a boring show that I know is going to be boring ahead of time. That was horrible. This isn't one that you'll like, Brian. You can even answer this one. Question I have been wondering for a long time. Has Stu Hart and Strangler Lewis ever faced each other, or did Stu come into the business after Ed? And if they faced each other, who do you think would have won the match?
All I have to say about Stu Hart, we actually talked about this yesterday. I mean, I'm sure he was a really tough guy, but if you watch Wrestling with Shadows, he's pummeling these two guys. How old do you think those two dudes were?
What, Carl Duke? The guy he was stretching?
Yeah.
Carl, I don't know. Carl's probably mid to late 20s.
Okay, he's stretching this mid to late 20s guy. And if you watch the end of the movie, this is Stu Hart. He can barely walk up a hill. And with all due respect to Stu Hart, if you put some guy face down on the mat, get behind him and put him in a choke, you're going to take him down. And I'm not sure if Stu Hart, I don't know, really could have held his own in an actual competitive situation with somebody that really knew what they were doing. Maybe he could have, but I've heard a lot of stories that say that most of the times when Stu stretched the crap out of somebody, Your grandma could have done the exact same thing if you were put in that position.
Well, he used to work out with those football players, and those football players, I mean, the thing is that Stu had the knowledge, and they didn't have the knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean,
same,
if you play...
same as when we talk about in UFC. It's all, it's all the rules, and, if you put a boxer in with a wrestler, or you put someone that knows, it's like the whole Gracie deal, someone who knows jiu-jitsu and was a kickboxer, someone who takes taekwondo, it's, a totally different game.
Yeah. But I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing. Like if you took any good boxer and then brought football players in, the boxer will kill the football players because he's not boxing. If you don't believe it, remember that tough man stuff on the NFL. I mean, they had Lawrence Taylor and Anthony Munoz and some of the biggest. I mean, those are two of the greatest football players of all time. I mean, at their position, maybe the two greatest at their positions of all time are right up there. And I mean, watching them in the ring with boxing gloves, and granted they're both retired now, but I mean, they had zero clue. I mean, you could have taken any bad boxer and he would have beat the crap out of them because it's their game. Just like
and then take that boxer and put him in a football game.
Oh, and they get killed.
Yeah, just murdered.
Yeah, But anyway, as far as Stu Hart and Strangler Lewis, I mean, the reality of Strangler Lewis is that Strangler Lewis had nobody knows anything about this time because Strangler Lewis probably had 6 shoots or 10 shoots probably his whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a reputation for being really, really tough. By the time Stu came in to pro wrestling, Strangler Lewis was actually still around. I doubt they ever wrestled each other, although it's a possibility because, their careers at the very beginning would have overlapped. But, I mean, it would never have been in a shoot situation anyway. What Strangler Lewis did was worked matches that looked more like shoots than they do now, and he had a reputation among everyone in the business as being the real deal. And I have no doubt he wasn't, in his prime. But his prime was like 1915. But anyway.
Yeah, remember that story you and Shamrock and those guys, and it was almost a brawl?
What'd you say?
Remember that story you were telling that one day about you were hanging out with Shamrock, some of the Lions Den guys, and it was...
The Hell's Angel story?
Yeah, situation.
Yes.
Okay, what if you'd been standing there or whatever, and Shamrock and his guys just totally brutalized these people, and you jumped in the end and pulled some guy's eye out? This is a wrestling business, and that story would, you know how that story would eventually end up. Dave Meltzer beat up 10 Hells Angels and pulled the guy's eye out. And you would have a reputation. You know what I mean? That's just how it is.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is, as far as up until, realistically, to me, up until this modern era when you've got the UFC, anything you say of, like, who would beat who, of old-time wrestlers, new-time wrestlers, or any period wrestlers, it's all speculation. I mean, like, if you go back, in fact, we got Tony Jones on, who actually was a hell of an amateur wrestler, and we'll get him on in a second. If you look at someone and you go, okay, if of all the guys that are in professional wrestling were to have a tournament today, under the rules of amateur wrestling, I have no doubt Kurt Angle would whip everyone pretty easily. Okay, but if you change the rules, that result may end up being different. It may not. It actually may not because he was that good of a wrestler. But again, if Kurt Angle, was out of shape, and some other guy was in shape who was actually, like maybe not quite as good of a wrestler, but a good wrestler, might have a chance, because conditioning is so much of a lot of it, and it's like it depends on the day, depends on the era. But all those guys way back.
Happen. Look at Tank Abbott and Don Fry. Tank Abbott fell down. He was killing that guy.
Oh yeah, he was hurting him bad, and he slipped.
Yeah, he slipped, and it was over.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get Tony Jones on. Tony, how you doing?
How are you doing, Dave?
Tony, what do you think about all this discussion about like who would beat who and all that? Because you've done amateur wrestling at San Francisco State, and I guess in fact actually not early in your career, early in his career, you beat Steve Neal, who later was actually the best heavyweight wrestler in the entire world for a while there. A lot of it depends on the day and the rules and all that stuff, right?
Right. First of all, before we even get into that subject, I want to thank you. I haven't talked to you actually since we actually sat down. I believe it was in San Francisco when we came to the Super Bowl show. And Terry Taylor asked me to come, and afterwards we went and hung out, and you brought me over, and I spoke to Ric Flair, and that's how the topic of Stephen Neal came up. And basically what happened with me and Stephen Neal was when I was a senior, and this is the 1994-95 season, we did a wrestling tournament called the Bakersfield Classic Open, Country Classic Open. And it's basically open to all D1 schools and just maybe 3 or 4 Division II schools. Since we were so highly ranked in Division II, San Francisco State that is, we were brought in to do the tournament. I was ranked third in the tournament. Number 1 seed was Kevin Langley, and Kevin Langley was the starter at the time. And I believe at the time I think either Stephen was a freshman or he was a redshirt. I wasn't exactly sure. And before the tournament actually started, we were all on the mat, just warming up and doing drills. And I was sparring with one of the Bakersfield kids who wasn't in the tournament because we were just messing around. And we were just sparring, and, I threw him a couple of times with a lateral, which is a lateral drop similar to a belly-to-belly. It was just a lateral drop. I threw him a couple times, and Kevin Langley, who had, seen me do that when we finally did wrestle in the semifinals, stayed away from that lateral drop that I was throwing on Stephen. And I didn't know who Stephen was until about, 5 years later, when I still stay in contact with San Francisco State. I talked to my wrestling coach, and, I said, well, who won nationals? And he was like, oh, the guy that you threw. And I said, who's that? He said, Stephen Neal. So that's how the whole thing really came up. Stephen Neal was actually a little bit before me. We were just, sparring, and I caught him with a couple of, lateral throws, and, he ended up, winning nationals later on. But
and worlds.
On your subject of, like, I kind of caught the tail end of it because when I was brought on, I really didn't catch all of the story. But I think what you guys were talking about is who was like a legitimate, if professional wrestling was like a legitimate wrestling sport, who would excel. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we were just talking. Actually, we're talking more about like historical figures in wrestling and who would beat who.
Uh-huh.
And the basic answer I felt is because what they did in pro wrestling, was never quote a shoot.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really determine the question actually was Stu Hart and Strangler Lewis, and of course it depends on if Strangler Lewis was 50 years old and Stu Hart was 25. Stu Hart may very well have beat him, but if they're both in their prime, I mean, who's to say and who's to know that eras are different? And most of what both of those guys did was not legitimate combat. I mean, it was like stuff in the gym and a legitimate match are two entirely different things anyway.
Right. Well, a lot of things can come into play in that. It's similar to like the UFC type of situation where you have different disciplines. Somebody might be a great barroom, brawler, and you have somebody else who might be skilled in, like say powerlifting, where he can just totally rely on just strength. And then you have somebody who might have like an amateur background or some sort of shoot fighting martial arts background. A lot of times, what you were saying, I heard a little bit earlier what you were saying, a lot of times it does make a difference. Like I heard you bring up like Kurt Angle, and you said Kurt Angle, who was an established, amateur wrestler. During my time, we actually wrestled during the same years. I mean, Kurt Angle was actually the guy to beat. When I was in college, Kurt Angle was D1 national champ, and he was the guy to beat. If he was at a tournament, that's who you wanted to take out, as soon as possible. You don't want him going to the finals. So Kurt Angle was actually a legitimate, accomplished amateur wrestler at the time that I was there. And when you compare the two, as far as like a young guy who might be fresh out of college, who might not have been as accomplished, if Kurt hasn't been, practicing his amateur and practicing his craft and his takedowns and his, speed and technique, it's very possible it can be more of a competitive matchup than if, Kurt was in his prime.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. One would be like saying like Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar. Kurt Angle went and won a gold medal, and Kurt Angle's career went further than Brock Lesnar's, but Brock Lesnar's only a year out. Kurt Angle's 4 years out. So, I mean, he may, if they were to actually wrestle today, Brock Lesnar may very well beat him.
Exactly. No, that's very true. That's very true. I mean, one thing, I've noticed that as well. I mean, one thing is for sure, it's just like any other craft. If you don't keep practicing it, day in and day out, because, us as amateur wrestlers, we have to practice every single day. I mean, there were times when I was too sick to actually go to school, but I'd go to practice because I didn't want anybody getting the upper hand on me, because if I would miss 2 days of practice, I'd come in and, literally out of 2 days, you'd be out of shape, and you wouldn't be able to hang in practice. And I mean, I would go out with, some 90-pounders, guys that were like 190 pounds, and at the time, maybe I was 220, 230, and, they would be able to take me down, without any hesitation, just because I'm not, as in shape, just because I missed 2 days of practice. So being out of action for like a year will make a drastic difference in competition.
One of the things I want to talk to you about is you're wrestling in a lot of different companies, APW, UPW, Urban Wrestling. You wrestled for Battle Arts recently. We talked a little bit about your background. You wrestled at San Francisco State, and then I guess you started training with Roland Alexander at All Pro Wrestling, and that's, God, it's about 4 or 5 years ago now?
Yeah, it's about 4 years now.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about Urban Wrestling. What's the status of that today, and what's your thoughts as far as that company?
As far as Urban Wrestling Alliance, I really, really can't speculate on what's going on right now. It's sort of up in the air. We were all brought out to do 2-week training sessions. We train for 2 weeks, and then we do an actual, 2 shots of shows. And we were brought out, I'd say, a month apart, but a lot of us haven't had any sort of interaction with Urban since October.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I really can't even speculate. I don't know what's going on. The last I heard, there was supposed to be a BET signing.
Right.
And, I have yet to hear anything further. I know I went on your website, and I'm actually a fan of your show, Dave. A lot of times I can't actually, watch the shows. I don't see SmackDown and Raw and Nitro as much as I'd like to. And, I just tune in to yada.com, and I'd listen to the broadcast late at night when I'm on the computer, working on websites and things like that. And I would listen to what's going on in the wrestling world, and, I would hear what you were saying. And I guess you had posted on your WrestlingObserver.com that you had communicated with BET and they didn't know anything about the program or something like that. Is that true?
First I had heard when it was going to start on that Wednesday a couple weeks back, and then someone from there said no, it's not, and then we had Mike Modest on, and he seems to think that there will be a deal announced, but that doesn't know exactly when, and that's a couple weeks ago, and that's the last we've heard on anything really.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at too. I mean, the last I heard was that there was supposed to be a signing. And nothing has been set since then. But there hasn't, as far as I know, there hasn't been a television shot since October.
How was last Wednesday working for? And you've been down there before, but how was working for Ultimate Pro Wrestling doing the Northern California versus Southern California thing? How did that go?
That's a very interesting concept. To be honest with you, I never thought it would happen. I mean, not in my wildest dreams did I ever think anything like that would happen. Modest, and Donovan. We're suggesting to Rick that we do some sort of NorCal versus Southern Cal because there was a show that we all did where I worked it, Donovan worked it, and Mike worked it, but we didn't work in the same match. Mike and I worked a 3-way, and we worked it with Frankie the Future. And at the time, Mike was telling me, he said, well, there's 3 of us down here. Wouldn't that be cool if we can come down and do some sort of angle where it's, it's like APW invading UPW and do like a NorCal versus Southern Cal thing. I said, yeah, that would be cool. He said, I think I'm going to pitch it to Rick and see what Rick thinks about it. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And about a week later, I got a call from Rick saying that, he wanted to use Mike, Donovan, and myself in a NorCal versus Southern Cal angle and have Roland come down as our manager, to create even more heat, And I thought that was, I thought that was a good idea. And we went down there, and I mean, you didn't go to that last show, did you, Dave?
I didn't go to that one. I went to the one before.
Okay. That show was, it was unbelievable the amount of heat we got when we came to that curtain. I think, honestly, I'd have to say probably 75% of it was just Roland coming through that curtain.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We came out and...
75% of the team.
Yeah. When Roland... Because actually, I can actually remember how we did this because we were standing behind the curtain, and Mike and I were just, drinking some water. Donovan went first, and I think Modest went after him, and then Roland went, and then I went after Roland. And you can actually just hear the pitch as soon as Roland went through that curtain. They just started screaming because, Roland being known in Beyond the Mat and, having that label, as that bad promoter type, thing they'd labeled on him. When he came through that curtain, it was just unbelievable. And we just, we got in the ring and Roland took the mic and just blasted UPW, and just praised APW and said how great APW is and how we're here to take over and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. People were just throwing stuff at us. Throwing stuff at us left and right. There was a girl in first row who was picking on me especially and was just screaming at me. I jumped out of the ring, started talking to her right in her face, and when I got back in the ring, she threw a piece of ice in the back of my head. And I turned around and looked at her. She threw another piece of ice at me. And I looked over at Mike, and I was like, God, these people are going crazy. And then Mike got hit. And it was just unbelievable the amount of heat we had. So, it came off really good. The angle came off really good. So I was really pleased with it.
So I got to read this. This is the WWF says 54 million people watched the XFL, but it was really 15 million. They said the Big Show lost 60 pounds, but he really gained 10. Does that mean when Vince said he made a woman climax 6 times, he really only made her climax once?
I would bet that's true.
Okay. We got a couple of questions here for Tony. Before we get to them, we'll start with this regarding Beyond the Mat. Where's the Beyond the Mat question right here? Here it is. Okay. I want to talk about. Well, I guess we'll talk about before I get to a couple of Beyond the Mat questions. Of course, Tony was featured in that movie. At one time, they were going to feature a whole lot of the movie around you. I'm sure they filmed you for forever, knowing how movies are done and how much footage is filmed to get even 2 or 3 minutes of screen time. As far as the finished product of Beyond the Mat, what was your feeling when you finally saw it?
Well, me personally, I went down for the world premiere. Barry Blasi invited me down, and at the premiere, I think Terry Funk was there, Jake the Snake Roberts' daughter was there, Mick Foley wasn't there, Barry Blasi was there, and all the people who had created the entire process were there. And when I watched it, I was very happy. And the reason I was very happy was I thought that he portrayed, I can only say for myself, I thought he portrayed me as positive, I guess, as he could have. There were a few things that he had shot that I really didn't feel too comfortable about, but he wanted me to, do it, so I did it anyway. And I was just happy he didn't make the final product. So I guess that's why, I liked it so much. There was actually some shots when he came to my home that he wanted to film my room. And my room was just, just totally messed up, and it was really sloppy.
Like Modest's room.
Yeah. Yeah, similar. See, because what happened is, I have a degree in film and television, and I'm a very, very big TV and movie guy, and I have videotapes and DVDs and laser discs and all kinds of stereo equipment. I mean, at the time that he wanted to shoot my room, everything was on the floor, and it was really messy. And he said, "Oh, I just want to tape it. I want to tape it. I want to show, where you watch your tapes and all this kind of stuff." I said, "All right, fine." So he had me come into the room and point out every aspect of my room and tell him what it meant, which I really felt was kind of corny and cheesy, but so I'll do it because he wants me to, and I'm just happy something like that didn't make it. But I liked the product. I thought it was good. I mean, there were certain elements, I've heard a lot of people say this, and I have to agree, there were certain elements that I felt maybe could have been touched a little bit more so, because I don't know what it was. There was something about it that I walked away from when I saw the movie, and it was the first time I saw it was okay, but maybe like the second or third time that I saw it, I kind of walked away saying like, this seems like something's missing. I don't know what it is. It just seemed like something was missing. Maybe it just felt like it was a story about 4 different lives or something like that. It just didn't feel like a well-rounded wrestling documentary. You know what I mean?
What do you think about the conclusion that everything is great in wrestling?
Oh, yeah. I thought he was just looking for a little wrap-up. You know what I mean? I thought he was just looking for some sort of little wrap-up. And, I mean, there were so many different aspects that really weren't touched in the movie. I mean, the behind-the-scenes stuff that we all know about. I mean, people who are in the business, things that we know about that weren't really touched. That they're touched in your local, 2020 specials and things like that. But I think he could have touched on maybe a little bit more of that type of stuff to make it a little bit more intriguing and to show how really hard it is. Because I think a lot of the people out there who aren't in the business don't understand. Especially people like us, like Chris Daniels and Mike Modest, myself, and like Donovan Morgan, guys that are still trying to get get our feet in, how hard it is to really get in there, and the political games, and what you have to do to try to make it, and busting your tail every day, and not just in the ring, but eating right and dieting and staying in the gym, and keeping a family life at the same time,
and then so much of it's still just downright luck.
Exactly, and then you do everything you're supposed to do, and Mike and I always joke about it. It's like, too bad the wrestling world isn't like real life, where you just, you go to work, you do what you're supposed to do, and pretty much you keep a job. It doesn't necessarily happen in pro wrestling. There's people out there that, get in because, like you said, luck. There's other people that don't get in who really deserve the break and deserve the chance, and it's just, you bang your head against the wall for years trying to figure this business out, and it just doesn't work.
There is no totally figuring out. I mean, I think you just to go with the idea that it's the right place at the right time, and look, I mean, it's just like you were talking about with China. I mean, like there's any tall woman bodybuilder could have been China, and if a promoter didn't want a tall woman bodybuilder on that day, none of them would have been China. And like she's got a horrible book that's number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list, and I mean it's like go figure it out. If you're like think of all of them. I'm not even talking about myself. Think of all of the really good writers, okay, that have really good stories to tell or really interesting lives. And the fact is the marketing machine of Vince McMahon is so unbelievably good that, sales of this, contrived product and contrived book blow them all away.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm not just saying this to try to get a job with Titan or anything like that, but I mean, Vince is an utter genius. I mean, he really is. I mean, me watching the sport, since I was a child, and I watched the old. Dave, we had AWA out here and all that kind of stuff when I was a child back in the early 70s, mid-70s. It was AWA and a little bit of Georgia Championship Wrestling. And, I didn't get WWF out here in San Francisco until about, I'd say, right when Hogan took over.
Yeah, 84.
Yeah, like right when Hogan won the strap, I think Honestly, I think it was the week after he'd won the strap, there was a report that Hogan had won the strap the week prior. So I think that's when I very first got it. It was on Channel 36. And, I mean, when watching the product and watching the transformation of the World Wrestling Federation, I mean, Vince is a genius in the sense of he knows what people want, what people want. He knows when things get stale. He knows when to change gears. I mean, he's very good at that. He takes, somebody like Chyna and, he morphs her into a certain type of character, and then when he feels like that character is not getting over or it's getting stale, okay, we need to change gears on her. We need to do this. And he's very good at doing that.
Yeah, they did a total 180. They went from her being this beast woman to being this sex symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
And just by a few, I mean, the modern, makeup and new hairdo and a few surgeries, and they totally morphed her into something totally different. And they totally changed gears with her.
It's just like what you were saying earlier, when you were saying it's, being in the right place at the right time. That's a very, very, very large part of it. I think also a big part is, who you know type thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you know somebody that can make some changes or make some differences for you, I think that also helps if you have that in your corner as well.
In the movie, there's the scene in the movie when you're coming out of the match with Mike Modest, and Jim Ross is talking to you about your chest and your arms and everything. And Tony asked this. In fact, this has been brought up so many times on this show and in other places. And it's like we're watching this as a movie scene, and I'm assuming that's like a real scene and not a contrived scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was a natural scene, and it wasn't something that okay. So that's what I assume.
No, that wasn't worked at all. What happened was beforehand, before we had gone through the curtain, Jim Cornette was talking to Mike and I, and he basically was just telling. There's a scene in the movie where he was talking to us in the ring, and that scene was pretty much put together, and that was kind of worked. Okay, when we were in the ring, and Jim Cornette was telling us to, they're not here to see us, they're here to see Steve Austin and The Rock, and just go out there and don't make any mistakes, that type of thing.
Yeah.
He told us that was worked, but right when we got all our gear on, we're about to go through the curtain. He took us aside and really talked to us, and pretty much told us the same thing, but this wasn't on camera. And he just basically told us to go out there, work hard. Don't worry about anything else. If you blow a spot, just keep going. And he told us, real critically, just to go out there and work hard. Well, when we come through the curtain, when I took the move that Mike dropped me with in the finish of the match, when he dropped me with that, I sold it and I was kicking my legs and I was selling it. And this part didn't make it on camera, but I was selling it. And the referee comes down to me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." He goes, "Oh, you worked me." I said, "No, I'm fine." He goes, "You got to go back to the locker room." I said, "Okay." So I sold it all the way back to the locker room, walked through the curtain, and Pat Patterson was right there. And he said, "Good work, good work." And I walked over to Jim Ross, and he said, "Good work, yeah, good sell, good sell." And I walked over to Mike and, congratulated Mike and said, "Thanks for taking care of me," and we did all that kind of stuff. And that's when JR walked over and kind of gave us our little, our little critique, which I appreciate. I appreciate him giving it to us because I've seen so many different tryouts by different guys where they go out there, they bust their tail, and they come through through the curtain back into the locker room, and they don't hear anything. He actually took us aside and gave us some sort of criticism, and it told me at the time where I made the biggest mistake was I went back to my college days when I was getting ready for the WWF, and I figured, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut weight, and I'm going to lean out, and I'm going to go in there shredded, and I'm going to look great, and when I take a bump, there's not going to be one thing on my body that jiggles, and I went in there with that type of attitude, and it backfired because when I went through that curtain, I actually went through the curtain at about 212 pounds.
Oh wow, for your height, that's
when I did
really
that,
smart.
yeah, because
yeah.
I was about 230 when we had gotten the whole thing set up. And I told Mike, I said, well, I'm going to get in great shape, and I was doing cardio day in and day out, and I was lifting, I was eating right, I was doing everything I was supposed to do, and I got down to about 212, and it was actually pretty scary because it got to the point where I would work out in the gym, I wouldn't sweat. And it got kind of scary, and when I walked through the curtain, I got in at about 212 pounds when I got on the scale in the locker room. So I blew it on that aspect because they wanted to see me 6'5". They wanted to see me about 250, 265 when I actually came in at about 215, and that's when JR told me to just beef up a little bit and change the singlet and make those added changes, and you'll be a prospect man.
Now, before we go to a break, because we're going to have to hit to a break, is there any thought, like when because the one thing that I've heard over and over from people who see that scene and see Jim Ross saying that to you, they're going like, he's telling you to take steroids without using those words. And maybe like because you were actually at 215 at your height, that's very, very light, and you certainly don't need to take steroids to gain 30 pounds from what you looked on that day. But to someone who doesn't know that and just go, You know what I mean? It's like the idea of, we need your muscles bigger. You know what I mean? Like, let's face it, what's the quickest way to get, we all know, what's the quickest way to get your muscles bigger? And, like, I don't know if you ever thought about that coming out of that, but that's, in fact, we get, from that, and I got a question, the question right here is like, did you feel pressure to take steroids after that?
To be totally honest with you, I mean, being politically incorrect here, there's always that type of pressure. I mean, wherever you go, there's always that type of pressure in any sort of contact sport. I mean, I remember the pressures back in college. When I go to college dual meets and you see guys walking around, 180-pounders, I mean, lean, but just shredded. And a lot of guys will take shortcuts that, by the simple fact that, they feel like that's the way to get ahead. And there's always that type of, that type of pressure and being in the professional wrestling industry. And whenever you go into a different organization and you're looking in the bodies in the locker room and some guys are, jacked up really thick and, you might see them getting a push and you start thinking, well, maybe if I start, getting jacked, then I can get a push. And I mean, there's always that type of temptation going around. It's just up to the individual if they feel like, they want to go the straight way or do they want to, to take a shortcut and get there, which, it's totally that particular individual's, preference of how they want to do things. But yeah, there's always pressure of doing that. I didn't really feel it from JR though.
Got some Nitro preview. This is for Monday's show. There's going to be more qualifying matches to determine which cruiserweights are in the 6-man, 4 corners elimination match that will take place at Super Brawl. And that's going to be Lash LaRue against Yun Yang, Billy Kidman against Illich Skipper, and that's it, I guess, right now. And then there's going to be Chuck Palumbo against Sean Stasiak, and Dustin Rhodes is going to challenge for a title. Let's see. This is from someone who... remember how...
AJ Styles match?
I think Eric Harris and AJ Styles are wrestling in a tag team against Evan Courageous and Jamie Noble. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. That wasn't listed in the WCW report, but yeah, I did hear about that as well. Let's see. Remember how the last time the WWF did that registered voters, how everybody was trying to somehow justify that they weren't lying?
Lying about...
Remember that the WWF had 14 million registered voters?
Oh, yeah.
Or whatever it was? When obviously the number was, closer to 5 or 6 million? Okay, so we're getting that now. Okay. I think the XFL may have combined all the numbers from the live crowds and the total that watched in every single market. That's still only 20 million. Although there was, just to be fair, okay, there was something in Nielsen that claimed, and I don't know how they got this, that 54 million people had watched at least 1 second of the XFL game. And that's where they got the 54 million. But, I mean, from a realistic television number, there were, God, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. It was 4.6, and I think like 15.7 million watched the Saturday game, and 4.6 million watched the Sunday game. So those are the real numbers, and they went on TV and said 54 million. Okay. Do you think that they were counting all the people there live as well as watching on TV? Okay. There were 4 games, and they drew about 36,000 a game, so that would add another 120,000 to the 20.6 million, so you could get up to 20.7 million. All right. Let's see if there's any more of this. We got Tony Jones here. What do we have here?
Maybe they added all the relatives that did not attend the game.
They counted all of the males between the age of 12 and 34 that should have been watching but happened to be out of the house at the time. Let's see. As you mentioned about the current the upcoming onslaught of Jim Ross bashing, which will happen next week, by the way. On the Torch, they have some quotes from a Post article where it questions how there could be such a thing as a good wrestling announcer. Says the article, according to the WWF website, good old JR, as Ross is known to WWF fanatics, is the best play-by-play man in wrestling. What does that mean? Does he read a script better than the others? The site says JR's announcing is louder than any other. USA Today denounced JR as a screamer and a hype artist. Perhaps they're saying the same thing. He's going to have a bad week this week. Oh, Mark Kriegel. Let's see what Mark Kriegel has to say here. He's a sports columnist for the New York Daily News. I've actually spoken to him on many occasions. Let's see. Actually, it says that he makes some valid points. Okay. This is nothing much on that. I'll look at this a little bit later. Tony, we got Tony Jones here. Tony, we got a couple of questions regarding your experience with Battle Arts. You wrestled there. Tell us a little bit about going to Japan and everything and working for that company.
When I worked for Battle Arts, that was in the summer of last year, 2000, and a guy, Yuji Shimada, he actually brought me out to do a 2-week tour for the promotion, and Yuji actually works for what's the name of that shoot? The shoot Pancrase, I believe it was. I don't know if it was Pancrase or if it was another one, but he's the referee for Pancrase.
Yeah, I think it's Pancrase. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the referee for that, and he also he's the booker and the promoter for Battle Arts. And he brought me out, and I did the 2-week tour where I worked. The owner of the company, his name is Toy, T-O-Y. I think I don't know his full name, but that's the abbreviation. He's the owner of the company, and I worked a match against him, and it was very what can I call it? The term I like to call it is a controlled shoot, is what it is. It's everything is stiff, everything is real tight and solid, but yet it's still a work in the sense of putting somebody over or somebody doing the job in that sense. But everything is stiff. When you hit a suplex, the guy doesn't go up for you. The kicks are, brutal. The slaps are brutal. The chops, everything. So when I worked this show for them, my first match was a tag match, and Toy and me finally got in there, and we did our little exchange, and it was a pretty solid match where he was very happy with it. So he brought me back for a second tour. And when I came back from my first one, I had people telling me, well, did they brutalize you? Did they shoot on you? Did they try to hurt you and break you down and all this kind of stuff? And I said, no. I said they were total gentlemen, and none of that kind of stuff happened. Well, I went back for my second tour, and when I went back for my second tour, they knew about my amateur background, and they wanted me to actually teach amateur wrestling to their classes. And I said, no problem. So I taught their classes twice a week, and I got in there the day before we did a show at Corrigan Hall, and I got in there with one of their kids, and they wanted to just go straight shoot style, pretty much like a UFC, just no close fist punching, but they can kick. So we were just sparring, and he was kicking low, and I'd catch his kick and shoot on his leg and bring him down, and me and him must have went for about almost 35 minutes, and we went for about 35 minutes, and finally I got on top of him, and I just kept controlling him. He couldn't get out, so Yuji was like, okay, next. So they got the next guy in on me. So I went with that guy, worked him for about 10 minutes. Next, got another guy in on me, to the point where I'd probably been wrestling for about an hour, and they got this other kid on me who was pretty much a beginner in Battle Arts. And I shot in on him. He spun behind me, locked a rear choke on me, and tapped me out. And I mean, it was brutal. I mean, no excuses on that one. I mean, I'd never been caught, so cleanly with a submission move. He just caught me from behind with a rear choke and just tapped me out. But I mean, it was rough. It wasn't what you call a worked promotion. It was real shoot style. Probably one of the biggest shoots in Japan from what I've heard when I came back.
Mm-hmm.
People, when I tell them, I went to Battle Arts, I actually talked to Sabu, and he said, who'd you work for out there? Because when I was out there, he was doing FMW, I think, at the time. And he was, who'd you work for out there? Big Japan? I said, no. He goes, All Japan? I said, no. He was like, who? I said, Battle Arts. He goes, oh. He goes, that's shoot, right? I said, yeah. He goes, oh, okay. That was kind of like the overall opinion of people. Like, oh, okay, I don't want no part of that one.
Now, did you want to go back, or have they talked to you about going back or anything?
Actually, they wanted me to come back in August when I was doing Urban.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't commit to them because at the time I was in the contract with the Urban Wrestling Alliance, which December 31st I was released from my contract. So I'm no longer under contract with them. And at the time I was under contract and I wanted to go back to Japan because we were just sitting at home. And I talked to a couple of the executives and they wouldn't give me clearance to go.
Do you know if they released everybody or?
They released a portion of the wrestlers, keeping just a few that were pretty much already in the storylines.
Mm-hmm.
So out of 14, it was 14 to 16 of us that were under contract. I believe they released like almost 8 to 10, and kept like just I think 2 tag teams and a couple of single wrestlers that were being pushed in the storylines at the time. Because it became a complicated situation with me because the gimmick they gave me was HTK, which is hard to kill. That's the abbreviation for it. And the hard to kill character was supposed to be this guy from the streets who, has been shot several times and just keeps coming back, and kind of like a Tupac Shakur character. It's like everybody hates him, and he's the tough guy in the neighborhood, and people are out to get him, and they keep shooting him, but he keeps coming back talking more trash. And I kind of looked and said, I go, do I really look like a guy that was shot 5 times? You know what I mean? And I pitched this idea.
Shot.
What was that, Brian?
Not beat up, but actually shot, huh?
Yeah, not beat up, not this bad, this badass from the streets. I mean, people have tried to attempt to kill me. You know what I mean? That's the character. So, I was like, I don't know. Do I really look like a guy that was shot, 5 times? And yeah, that's a good point, man. And you don't really talk like you're really heavily from the streets. And I said, can we do something different with this character? And I talked to the owner of the company, and I said, well, can we do something? And he, well, what do you have in mind? I said, well, can we do maybe like an HTK gimmick where we can do it kind of true to myself, but we can put a little twist on it and, you know, try to make it marketable, where maybe I'm this guy from the streets who went to college, became real educated, and now I come back to the streets and I got a chip on my shoulder, and, you know, I put down everybody because they didn't do the same thing I do. You know, like I put down the inner city, and I put down all the people that, you know, live in, you know, in the projects and all that kind of stuff. And he kind of liked the idea, and we went with it for 2 shows, and that was it. We haven't shot since. And that was it. And they changed the character from Hard to Kill to Honor, Truth, and Knowledge.
Okay. And then,
so, you know, in a nutshell, the character wasn't really flying. They didn't really care for the character, you know, or maybe I just couldn't pull the character off the way they'd wanted. So I don't really know what the reason is.
Mm-hmm.
So.
With your experiences, what experiences have you had, like, you know, working as far as with WWF, WCW? I mean, you've had tryouts with both and everything like that, and just the difference in the reaction and backstage, and how would you compare them?
The reaction that I've had positive reactions from both. I've been very, very, very fortunate. Beyond the Mat has helped me tremendously, to the point where whenever I'm backstage, there's a portion of the people that, you know who I am from the movie, and it helped give me some sort of credibility where at least they can say, well, he's a worker. You know, they don't think I'm just, you know, some guy that strolled back, or I'm not a friend of the security guard or something like that. So they can, you know, pretty much look at me and tell that I'm a worker and, you know, that I've done some stuff. And I've had pretty positive reaction. Terry Taylor was very instrumental in getting me, you know, a lot of my gigs, and I'm, you know, forever grateful for that, because Terry Taylor got me into the WWF dojo. He contacted me in November of '99, said he saw a lot of talent in me and he wants to do this and that with me, and, you know, he wants to bring me into the dojo and have Tom Bruce Pritchard look at me. And I said, okay, that sounds good, you know, let's do that. And he said, okay, I'll call you in about a week to set everything up, and I never heard from him. And I finally called the offices, and I was like, I'm trying to get a hold of Terry Taylor, and they said he's no longer working here.
Oh, that's perfect timing.
Yeah, right. You know, typical, you know, like Modest will tell you.
It's like Modest,
typical
yeah.
being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and,
yeah.
you know, so I said, oh, great, now what do I do? So I called Bruce, you know, which I've always heard, don't call Bruce, you know, because he's a busy man, he's got so much to do. I said, okay, well, I'll call Bruce, I have nobody else. And so I called Bruce, and Bruce was like, okay, what do you want? And I told him, I said, well, Terry wanted to bring me in, and he was like, well, I don't know if I can honor everything that Terry does. Terry's not here anymore. And I said, okay, well, he goes, well, hold on a second. I got Terry's stuff right in front of me. And he pulled my name up, and he goes, oh, Tony Jones. I said, yeah. He goes, San Francisco. I said, yeah. He goes, yep, I got you penciled in. Okay, Howard will call you, and you'll be flying out in probably 3 or 4 days. And I flew out, and I trained with Tom Pritchard, and that was a real positive thing. I trained with him for 3 days. Me and this other kid, Sean Evans, actually trained with Tom, and it was only a class.
That's one of Dusty's guys, right?
Exactly. I've just found out that he's been working with Turnbuckle in Championship Wrestling.
Yeah.
And we worked there together, and we were the only 2 in the WWF dojo. Taz was there. He had just signed. I think it was maybe a month or so, a couple weeks beforehand, and he was there training. But we didn't get in the ring with him. We just pretty much drilled with each other the whole time, and, you know, put together a couple of matches, and, you know, it was real positive, and, you know, I never really heard anything, and I called Terry in WCW about a month later and told him that I'd gone to WWF, and he said, well, I'd like to try to get you in here now. And I said, okay. So he set up the tryout for me at the WCW. He wanted to set up the tryout at the Super Brawl. That's where I saw you, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? He wanted to set me up for a tryout there. And it didn't work because it was pay-per-view, and he told me to come to Sacramento the next night for the Nitro, and he said he didn't have time for that one, so he said, I'll tell you what, Tony, if you come to Reno, he goes, I guarantee you that I will get you seen by, you know, some heavy hitters. I will get you seen, and you will have a good look. I said, okay, I appreciate it. So I flew out to Reno, and, you know, they took care of me and everything, and, you know, I got a chance to wrestle in front of, it was Kevin Sullivan, Mike Graham, Ric Flair, Terry Taylor, Eric Bischoff was standing there, you know, and it was real positive. I got a chance to wrestle in front of them, and it was what's called a closed session, which I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Dave. I've never actually heard of a guy wrestling, getting in gear, getting in the ring, and wrestling in front of an empty crowd, except for just the executives.
They've done that in WCW a couple times, and they'll videotape it. Yeah, because they brought a bunch of guys from Calgary area.
Okay.
I mean, I think maybe when they were in Toronto, and they had them all wrestle like at 4 o'clock before Nitro.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, they put me on about 45 minutes before they opened the doors. You know, and Terry said, get in your gear, you know, oil down, do everything that you would do as if you were walking out in front of this crowd. I want to see your look. I want to see exactly what you got to offer. So, you know, I did the whole 9 yards and got in the ring with this kid named Byron Green, who was a friend of Sid Vicious. And, I mean, he was identical. I don't know if maybe you might know who he is. But I guess from what he had told me, Sid and him, they both ran an angle in USWA at a time where they were brothers.
Okay, so he wrestled in USWA under the name Johnny Rotten.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know what his real name was, but there was a guy who looked a lot like Sid Vicious. So yeah, I'm sure that's who it is.
Yeah. I think that's actually who it is. Johnny Rotten does sound familiar. So we got in there and we did a couple of things, and it was just real simple headlock, takedown, take it again, tackle, body slam. It was just basically to see, if we could bump and we can move, and it wasn't a structured out match. It was, it was almost like it was a test basically. It was like a quiz. Terry would say, Tony, snatch the head. I snatched the head. Throw him off, take a tackle, drop down. Tony, go up for the slam, and I mean it was just step by step what to do. So, we did everything, and Terry got me out of the ring and said, you look really good. He goes, I'm going to try to set you up another tryout, and I want to get you in front of people, and I want to see if I can get you a job and all this kind of stuff. And I said, okay. A couple weeks later, they started running into, WCW started running into obstacles, and he said, well, I can't get you a tryout right now, and, what I'd like to do is send you to the power plant and get you in front of Eric again and Paul Orndorff and get you in front of Sarge. And they sent me to the power plant. And when I went to the power plant, pretty much everything you've ever heard about the power plant was pretty much true. I'd heard like, oh, they beat you up and, all this kind of stuff. I went in there and, I mean, it was like a lot of squats, a lot of push-ups, a lot of sit-ups, it was pretty brutal. I mean, fortunately I had the amateur background where I'd done similar stuff, but I mean, if I hadn't had some sort of, training prior, I don't know if I could have made it through it. It was pretty brutal, the training that they had at the power plant. For the first day, the second and third day were real, productive days where we actually got in the ring and sparred, and, Sarge and Paul Orndorff got in the ring with me, and Terry Taylor got in the ring with me on the final day, and it was real productive, but, of course, we never heard anything, so.
Was anybody else there training with you when you were there?
There was a kid named Adam Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
I think he goes by the name of Scrap Iron Adam Pierce. And
I think from Michigan or something, yeah.
Yeah, he recently moved out to San Diego. And he actually just emailed me a few days ago, seeing if I can get him some bookings here in California, which I told him, I'll do for him. But he was there. There's another kid. This is actually a tragic story. There's another kid, Rashi Brown, black guy, about 6'3", about 250 pounds. I guess he was under developmental with WWF. And, it was really brutal on him because what they did was they had us get in there and do amateur of all things, okay? And it was just, just a breakdown, it's typical what you would expect, to do to, like, guys breaking into the business, and you want to stretch them and humble them, and, if they have any sort of egos, you want to break them with the egos. So they put us in the ring, and they put me in there with, the first guy they put me in there with was Sonny Siaki, who I later ended up working with in Urban Wrestling Alliance. He goes by the name of Money. And he was a real nice guy, real quiet, and, and they put me in there with him, and, I didn't want to sit there and, upset anybody or, offend anybody or anything, so all I would do is just not allow them to hurt me. I wouldn't try to take anybody down. I wouldn't try to, show off or anything like that. So Sonny got on top of me, and I got out, I got out of Sonny, pushed him off, and then he got me back down again. They wanted me to start on bottom. They just wanted me in referee's position on bottom. So they wanted somebody to pound on me. They didn't want to put me on top. They didn't want to go standing or anything. So I was on bottom. Sonny was trying to crank on me, couldn't crank on me. So since Sonny couldn't do anything, they put Reno on top of me. And when they put Reno on top of me, Reno started clubbing at me, trying to get me to break down. I wouldn't break down, and I got Reno off of me. And then Sarge just said, Tony, do some laps. So it was almost like I got punished because nobody could break me down. So that was the horror story that happened to me. It's like, I did everything I was supposed to do, without trying to, I didn't jump up and try to take anybody else down or trying to show off or anything like that, because they had no idea who we were. They didn't know if we had wrestled before or, they had no sort of knowledge if I had done amateur or anything. And I remember hearing somebody when Reno was on top of me just clubbing at me, and when he was trying to bring me down, somebody was like, Sarge, he knows what he's doing. And Sarge was like, I don't care. So I ended up, standing up, getting Reno off of me. I was like, Tony, give me some laps. And while I was doing laps, I actually heard Adam Pierce scream. I guess one of the guys had twisted his ankle or something, cranked his ankle.
Oh, jeez.
And it was pretty brutal. It was pretty bad. But I mean, it was real. I got through it. I got through it pretty good. And I talked to Terry about it, and Terry was like, well, they sometimes that kind of stuff happens, and it's it's not done intentional. And I really believe it wasn't intentional. It was just, it was just sometimes you get a little rough, and sometimes guys don't know how to do amateur, and guys put themselves in different positions, and things can happen. I've heard people scream in amateur wrestling practice. Things just happen if you get in the wrong position. But it was pretty brutal, and I got a chance to talk to Paul Orndorff and worked out with him and everything, and it was actually a good thing for me. I was really happy to be there.
It was today's Washington Post, which was actually the one that had the story of how JR could be a good wrestling announcer, how there could be such a thing as a good wrestling announcer, because it says, does he read a script better than the others? They had a story, and they are saying that The Rock is going to be working with Jim Ross and Jesse. I know The Rock's going to be at the game on Saturday night, but they're saying that he will be part of the broadcast team, which I had not heard. They said adding The Rock to the team is being characterized as a move to make up for Ventura being more conservative than they had hoped for, says the article, because NBC has discovered that Jesse Ventura takes his job as governor seriously enough to not do anything really outrageous on broadcast TV. They're bringing in The Rock. He's the one whose great talent is raising an eyebrow to the LA game to add that certain WWF je ne sais quoi, I don't know what that word means, but I could pronounce that, to the televised festivities. There are no details regarding how extensive Rock's role will be, but they said he did play college football, which of course he did. Anyway, that's pretty much it.
Did that say his best talent was raising an eyebrow?
Yes, that is what the article said.
That's nice.
It's not his best talent, but this is from Jim, who's asking this for Tony, and says, I grew up in Hayward, and if I'm not mistaken, I lived right next to where APW trained, and I was curious as would Roland get a piece of your contract or Mike Modest's contract if you guys were to sign with the company? I mean, because that was, of course, in Beyond the Mat.
The whole thing in Beyond the Mat with Roland making, I think it was 20%. I think they quoted him as. I think they said Roland making 20% of what we make. It was always explained to me, unless I'm wrong, it was always explained to me that Roland would always get a percentage of your money if Roland had booked you for that particular gig. Which means if Roland picks up the phone and calls up, somebody in WWF and says, hey, I got this kid, Tony Jones, he's this, he's that, give him a shot, and I get a shot and I ended up, getting in there, then he rightfully would deserve 20% of a cut.
Like as an agent fee?
Yeah, exactly. Same thing as an agent. And that's the way it was understood to me. Now, if I go out there and I do all the legwork and I do all the paperwork and I go through all this and I pay the travel and I do everything that an agent would do, then technically he should not probably get the amount, but it would have to go up to the individual as well as saying, okay, well, he's been such a helping hand to my career that I almost feel guilty not giving him a percentage. Now if that's the case, then you can give him a percentage, but by legal terms, I think that the way it was understood to me is that if he gets the gig for you, then he would get a rightful 20% of your purse, whatever you make.
Do you feel like, having been to like the power plant and been to the WWF dojo and everything like that, and seen, I guess, some of the guys from UPW and everything, how would you rate UPW training, WWF training, WCW training, and APW training, and Battle Arts, because you were in their dojo as well? How would you kind of like compare, contrast? What are the good and bad points of all these different organizations as far as the training?
That's a real interesting question, because in my opinion, every single one that you've just described, there's something unique and different about every one of them. Where in APW, we were taught to wrestle old style, old 70s, old style wrestling, where we get out there and we can actually work a 15, 20, even a Broadway hour match. That's the way we were trained. And we were trained to actually, put together matches as if we were going 20 to 25 minutes. My very first professional wrestling match was, I think, about 12 minutes. My very first match, And I've actually gone, tag team matches and single matches past 35 minutes, up to 45 minutes. But yet in UPW, you're pretty much trained to, do television, like WWF, WCW television type matches where you go 6 to 8 minutes, probably 8 minutes being a top match. So that's the difference between those two. It's a different training mechanism, As far as WCW, they train you straight, kind of similar to UPW. They train you straight to television, which I don't want to come off like I'm talking bad about the power plant, because I did have good experiences there. I mean, it was just that very first, I'd say maybe the second hour of me being there. The first hour wasn't too bad. It was just cardio. It was the second hour where they actually put us in there and they wanted to break people down, and it was fortunate that I had the amateur background. I knew how to take care of myself, that, I didn't get hurt. Type of thing where, we weren't just, some green guys, straight off the truck, trying to get a job. A lot of us have been working 5-6 years plus, trying to get a gig, and, they brought us in there and just tried to break us down. But, I had good experiences there. Little things that I did and I was trained in APW to do, which is real subtle things, which I've been told to correct upon by WWF and WCW, both when I was in the dojo, is whenever you throw a punch in APW, we've been taught to throw a punch almost like a shoe punch, where you just throw it in there and, you don't stomp the foot, you don't slap the arm, you don't do that type of stuff. When I was in WWF and WCW, they encourage you to do so. So it's just little different things that you learn, when you go in, to different areas or different, from what somebody told me, it's difference between West Coast and East Coast. I don't know if it's so much the organization, but, like you take the arm, like if you do an arm bar, we tend to do it, we meaning APW, we tend to trap the arm with the left arm. But guys on the East Coast will trap it with the right arm. So there's little subtle things that, that we learn, when you go off and do other promotions and you work with other people. But I really can't say nobody's right or wrong, but they're just, there's different ways of doing things. And I've learned a lot, tremendous a lot by just working with, so many different people. Tom taught me a lot of different things as far as, when I take a schoolboy bump, when I take a back bump, everything, just little things that you can just fine-tune that somebody will say, okay, you're not doing it wrong, but, this is a way you can do it that would be more acceptable here,
Let's go to the phones. We'll go to Chris in New York. Chris, what's going on?
How's it going?
It's going pretty good.
I have a couple questions for Tony about Beyond the Mat. The scene where they were showing Vince McMahon watching him do a Fisherman's Buster and call the move, he thought he made a mistake. I guess he thought he was going for some kind of a perfect plex move. Like, was that frustrating for you to see that, he's the guy that's the head of this whole company that you're trying out for, and he didn't even know what's a fairly basic move as far as, wrestling fans go, that he didn't even know that and actually thought it was a mistake that you made?
That's actually really funny because Roland, before the movie actually came out, Roland, I guess, had gotten an email from somebody who had seen a preview of the trailer. And there was that scene in it where Roland had, told me, he said, Tony, remember when you went for the Fisherman Buster? I was like, yeah. He said, well, according to this guy, Vince McMahon, thought that you had lost the guy in midair and dropped, dropped Modest right on his head. And I was like, oh, no, he didn't think that. And he's like, yeah, it's in the movie. I was like, oh, no. So when I saw the movie, I kind of cringed. I was like, oh, no. It's like, it was supposed to be like that. It was supposed to be like that. But, Vince is the man. I can't even second-guess the guy. I can't say anything. Like, what are you talking about, Vince?
Just hadn't watched, he hadn't kept up on his Japanese tapes, and that's what happened.
Yeah. I mean, the Perfect Plex has been utilized for years and years and years in WWF. So I think that he probably thought that I was just going into the Perfect Plex and, just dropping him straight back. But what we were actually trying to do is just lift him straight up and drop him. And when I talked to Mike about it, I said, Mike, that makes me look really bad. He was like, yeah, it makes you look like you don't care about me, and it makes me look bad because it looks like I went up heavy.
Right.
So it kind of blasted both of us, but.
Yeah, but you know what it makes, but it made Vince look the worst of anyone because anyone who watches tapes goes, that's the Pittsburgh Plunge, and that's exactly how the move's supposed to be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the fans know. I mean, pretty much like the smart ones pretty much know the move because they've seen it utilized several times. But at the time when the movie very first came out, you won't believe how many people actually saw that movie. People that I used to work with when I was working at Visa, people would come up to me and say, everything looked good. It's just, did you, when you dropped that guy, did it hurt him? I was like, no, it was supposed to be like that. So. You'd be amazed. Some people actually will see when Vince McMahon says, oh, no, we need some work there, they think that I blew it.
Yeah, if they don't know anything about wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, like the people that have watched wrestling for years and, they're pretty smart to everything, they know, what we were supposed to be. But, no, I wasn't too upset by it. I was more like, oh, God, I felt bad, like, oh, no, but I can't say anything about it,
And the scene where you're talking about Roland Alexander, and you say how, some nights you only get $25, some nights you don't get paid, and then they cut to the next scene where you're saying he's one of the best indie promoters as far as payoffs are concerned, and they sort of, did that get you mad at all, that they sort of seemed to position it like they were trying to play you against Roland, or?
Yeah, that totally was done without my knowledge, and me and Roland have gone back and forth with that one. Me and Roland are, God, how can I put this? We get along very well, and we respect each other. It's almost like brother rivalry.
Right.
Like we might yell at each other and scream at each other, but we still care about each other.
Right.
Like I care about the guy. I appreciate everything he's done for me. I'm sure he appreciates the same out of me, and he knows that I've done everything I can to help his promotion. I know he's done everything he can to help me. So, there's no animosity or anything, but that little switch off that they did where it looked like, you know, I was talking bad about him, and then he was protecting himself, and he went back and forth. I had no knowledge that it was going to be shot that way. You know, I didn't really think it was going to be done like that. It's amazing when you're actually doing the movie how things are done. You know, he just came up to me and asked me a couple of questions, you know, and just said, so, Tony, what do you normally make on a Jim Morris night? And, you know, at the time when we shot the movie, I was about probably within my first year of wrestling. And when we shot the movie, I was making, you know, anywhere from $0 to $25. If I had a really, really good match, I'd get $25. If I had a mid-card preliminary match, I'd get 0. You know, which was not a super big deal for me because the most important thing was the exposure and the experience at the, you know, at the time of, you know, trying to get, you know, your name out there and trying to get some work. That wasn't a problem, you know. But the way he shot it was almost like I was calling Roland a liar.
Yeah, that's the impression I got.
Yeah,
I was looking at it like.
And,
yeah, it made Roland. That made Roland.
Not necessarily you call. Well, yeah, I guess it would.
You know, it's almost like because he was sitting there saying, "I'm one of the best indie players out there," and I'm sitting there basically saying, "No, you're not."
You're making it sound like he's some evil promoter that, you know, that fits his wrestlers, and
you know. And
the fact that you made the comment first, I think the way it was edited would make it reflect more poorly on him. If he made the comment and then immediately afterwards you said, "I only make $0 to $25," then it would look like you were, you know, doing it to spite him or whatever.
Right. I mean, like Roland did get a little upset at the whole thing, and I said, well, Roland, I said, I told the truth. You know, I said, I didn't sit here and lie. I'm not going to sit here and lie about the whole thing. I said, that's what I made. You know, that's not what I make now. You know, it's totally confidential what I make on a given show. But at the time, you know, since he asked me, and, you know, that was part of the storyline, I told him, I said, this is what I make, and this is the most he's paid me. This is the least amount he's paid me, you know. And at the time, I mean, there are certain people that, you know, might have gotten paid more. They might have had, you know, more experience and all that kind of stuff. So to sit there and say that Roland, because I guess Roland got labeled as this guy that pays all his wrestlers $25 peak, that's it, you know, which is not the case. You know, that's what I was making. You know, when I did that movie, that's what I was making.
Yeah, it's kind of the impression he got that you know, everybody in the company made $25, you know, maybe max, you know, and it just made him look like, you know, he was just completely lying, you know.
Yeah, no, it you know, it's funny what photography can do. You know, it you know, I mean, it told the truth, but at the same time, it played the truth and it kind of teased the truth a little bit.
Well, the thing was that, but it wouldn't have meant anything except Roland was out there kind of bragging about being a great independent payoff guy, and that's where it came off badly.
Yeah,
it's like they did it for the sake of the movie to sort of.
I mean, if it was just going like, you know, Lowell, you know, like they're basically guys that, you know, are doing it for the ring time and for the experience. You know, you could frame it differently, but he was, you know, like, you know, where he goes, they're paid and they're paid well. You know what I mean? Then all of a sudden it's like,
that's the line there.
And they're loving it, right? And so that kind of like, that's where he was going to come off badly.
But yeah. Also, the other question I was having, and sort of carries over from yesterday's show, and you mentioned something about the gimmick they were going to give you in urban wrestling. Have you encountered a lot of racism, or any racism as far as from promoters wanting to give you, you know, stereotypical type gimmicks or expecting something out of you that you're not, you know, like you said, that gimmick where you've been shot 5 times and they wanted you to be this kind of street you know.
As far as any sort of like racial prejudice, I mean, you know what? Last night I turned on the Yada.com and I'm sorry, Dave, I got really sleepy and I couldn't listen to the whole broadcast.
Oh,
so I didn't hear the
whole
thing with your interview last night, which I really wanted to hear, which I'll probably hear tonight. But as far as racial prejudice that I've experienced, I remember probably the worst racial experience I've ever experienced in a sport. Didn't actually happen in pro wrestling, but amateur wrestling. When we, San Francisco State, went up to Oregon, and we were wrestling the University of Oregon Ducks, and we were up there, and our team was pretty minority at the time. We had some Hispanics, we had a couple of Asians, we had some blacks on the team, and I mean it was very, very, very well diverse. Okay, and we went up to Oregon, and one of our guys, this black guy, was out there, real tough guy, and he was out there just beating the hell out of this guy from the Oregon team, just beating the hell out of him. And during the match, some fan, actually screamed out this derogatory term, just screamed out, "Why don't you put that monkey back in his cage?"
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I was like, no, he didn't just say that. I was like, almost like in shock. And right when I was thinking that, the whole audience laughed.
Really?
They just laughed, like it was so acceptable, you know. And I just kind of looked over at my coach, and my coach just shook his head. And I kind of looked at the other guys on the team, and they just kind of shook their head. And I was like, wow, living in San Francisco, which is a very diverse city, and, real big cities and like Los Angeles or New York and things like that, you don't really experience as much. But when you go to like different cities and smaller towns, you'll notice that type of, subtle stuff. The only thing that was a little irritating as far as the pro wrestling aspect with Urban was I couldn't help but feel. Now, I'm not saying that this is what they did to me, but I could not help feel, like in a way, being articulate or being educated was like hindering me in some way.
Right, that's what I was going to say. Where
yeah, I couldn't help but feel that. And
also, when I watched the tape, I almost thought that, the characters that they were looking for were more, not just more street-oriented, but also, because you're mixed heritage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that it wasn't, like, I don't know how to phrase it, maybe not black enough for them. Do you know what I mean?
I couldn't help but feel that way, Dave.
I watched it on TV, and that was just by the portrayal of seeing you and some of the other people, I almost felt that, especially because, you had more experience than most of the guys there, and that who they were putting over and the nature of how they were putting guys over, I almost felt that they saw, look, he's half Samoan, so it's not ethnic enough for what we're looking for or something.
Yeah. I couldn't help but feel that way. I mean, they definitely were targeting like a street culture. And that's not what I was, originally told it was going to be. I thought it was going to be, because I actually did an interview for IGN.com, where I was actually doing Urban at the time, going through training, and I hadn't signed with the company or anything. And I was under the impression from what people were telling me was it was going to be like an Urban Wrestling Alliance where it was going to be positive role models of, different characters and everything. And when we finally got the thing going, it was very, very street-oriented. It was very, you'd have to throw certain derogatory slang terms out there, and it was, using words, bitch this, and, it was like totally different than what I'd expected, and I thought we were going to really concentrate on wrestling because, like a lot of the other guys that you talk to, I wanted to be like the Ric Flairs, the Ricky Steamboats, the guys like that. When I was a kid, that's what I wanted to be, I didn't really care so much for being a wrestler / hip-hop star.
Right, because that's sort of the impression, like with D'Lo Brown, for instance. And it's kind of a tricky way to even say this because it makes it sound like somebody would be surprised that a black man would be articulate, but that's not the way it's to come off. But it's like it seems like he has to sort of overdo his mannerisms, and he almost sounds like phony when he says certain things, that they're trying to push him as more of a street hip hop sort of character, where he almost sounds like a white guy trying to do that. You know what I mean? I don't know if that sounds, I don't know if that sounds right or not, but
no, I understand.
Yeah,
what
you know
you're saying.
So it's almost like it's a hindrance where they seem surprised that you speak the way you do, that you weren't the street character that they were looking for. And also, what I was going to ask is, the people that tried to give you the people that run Urban, are they black, or are they white, or
it's a pretty mixed group of guys and females that are running the company. Honestly, it's not it's being advertised as a black company type thing, just because BET is picking it up, that doesn't necessarily mean it's black owned. But yet the pretty much the whole production crew is mixed up of different minorities. There's Asians, there's Hispanics, there's Caucasians, there's blacks. The production team that I've seen, the ones that are shown to the wrestlers, it's a pretty diverse group of people. But yeah, to get back to your question, I really couldn't help but feel just a tiny bit that, almost talking the way that I talk and, being the way that I am almost hindered me as far as that wrestling organization went. I have a question actually for Dave. What did you think of the product, Dave? Did you see anything of it?
I saw a couple of shows, and I thought like for starting, I thought the wrestling was better than I expected it to be. I thought they had way too many women, and it was kind of too far out on the storylines, because to me the storylines were so unbelievable that it kind of had that feel of someone who wasn't a wrestling fan thinking that they were writing a wrestling show for wrestling fans, but it didn't quite hit. But like what I liked about it was that a lot of the guys, there were like 3 or 4 of the guys, and Jorge Estrada, was the one that really stood out to me, is that there were guys who really had a lot of potential, and they were all young, and I thought that, to me, a place where young guys can get some good TV that haven't been exposed and don't look like the retreads, I thought that was like pretty cool, and I was kind of wanting to get interested in it, you know what I mean? But it seemed like there was like, 2 women for every guy character almost.
Yeah.
Just want to get to this one letter here from Kevin Donlin, who's a longtime reader of The Observer. Do the new owners of WCW have enough deep pockets to afford the turnaround timetable? That's the big question, is do they have the knowledge to turn it around? Because without the knowledge to turn it around, there is no timetable. But do they have the money to afford what's obviously going to be, even if they do everything.
How long the turnaround is.
Yeah, a lot. I'm sure a lot depends on how long. And if there is a turnaround, well, if there's not a turnaround, they're not going to make it. Yeah, there has to be a turnaround. Do they? I think if there's signs of a turnaround there, because they're good at getting investment money, they probably, if it looks like, if ratings start slowly coming up and attendance starts slowly coming up, I think that they'll have the resources to get the funding to last that time. If there's no movement in the ratings and stuff like that, well, then there is no turnaround, and then, they probably wouldn't work, then it's going to be a lot of trouble. I mean, ultimately, they got to show movement, or else they're in a world of trouble. And this is, did the creative end of WWF slip during Vince's bodybuilding federation? Will the XFL cause the creative end to slip again? That's a real interesting question. If I look at the timetable, when they did the bodybuilding, I think the creative end was, WWF at that period was not particularly good. I never thought about that.
But was that a result of the bodybuilding or other problems?
A lot of different things. Vince was really into the bodybuilding at that point. I mean, I remember conversations I would have with him at that period. And we talked, more bodybuilding than wrestling. So his head was heavily into it. And this one, I think unless if they get some, really good writing, Vince himself, I mean, his primary goal is going to be to make that XFL look good, and it is going to make some of his focus go away from the wrestling. It's impossible not to. So he goes, without unions and legislation being half-baked, is the media, however imperfect, the best way to pressure wrestling companies to change? I think that it is. Yeah, I think the problem is that the media doesn't understand wrestling. I mean, and it doesn't really even, sports media doesn't really understand entertainment, and I think we found out in the last week. I mean, just the whole statement is, how could there be a good wrestling announcer? Does he read a script better? I mean, when you read a line like that, you realize, I mean, there are people in the media who know wrestling, but there's the wrestling media people for the most part. So it's going to be tough to get a lot of really intelligent stuff. I mean, how often does someone outside of the wrestling circle, when you read a media article on wrestling, how often is it good? And even the feature that was really good, which was the ESPN Outside the Lines, one of the reasons why that feature was so good was because there's a guy named Barry Abrams who works for ESPN Outside the Lines, who was a key part of that team, and he is a huge and very knowledgeable wrestling fan. But if it was just left to people with football backgrounds to cover wrestling, I don't know that it's a very intricate business that everyone thinks they know right away, but actually from the outside it's very hard to understand. Unless you're a fan, I think it's really hard to understand it. And this is one that I want to ask Tony and Brian, actually, because this is kind of an interesting question. Is which decade will have harsher effects on the wrestlers themselves? The steroid era of the 80s or the video game of the 90s, which I guess I'm assuming what he means by that is the steroid use that was prevalent in the 80s, or destroying the bodies, or the video games of doing, all of the high spots. The thing is that now we have both, if you really think about it.
I think it's going to be the 90s, because the steroid thing tore the body down, and there's going to be a lot of broken bodies. But, through the 90s, these guys were not only destroying their bodies, but they were destroying their heads with, all the crazy chair shots. And just.
I have to agree with Brian on that one. I think today's generation will suffer more effects on the simple fact that when you look at somebody from the 80s, like a Dynamite Kid, who was just, at the time, I mean, just ahead of his time as far as a bumper and as far as the things that he would pull off. It's almost the norm today.
But he was another one who it would be a little bit of both.
Yeah. And it's what he's doing is completely the norm today, and I just, I hope that something like that doesn't happen to anybody, else.
I think it will.
Yeah, I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of it happening. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think, one of the things also is that, I just think that the career span of today's wrestlers certainly is not going to be what the guys, a lot of the guys in the 80s, started when they were 22, 23 years old, and were still going at 45. And I think that the style that the guys wrestle today, I think that's going to, if the guys who start at 23, I think by the time they're 35, it's going to be pretty tough on them physically if they're, working to stop. But the flip end of that is that the guys in the 80s in WWF and WCW could work 250, 300 times a year. And if you're not in WWF, no one's really going to work 100 dates. So maybe in that way...
Yeah, but they had that kind of... I mean, look at Hogan's style. I mean, Hogan and Savage. Well, I shouldn't even say Savage so much.
Savage took a lot of bumps when he was young.
He did, but a lot of those guys now, they can still work using that old style, and it is not going to cut it today. If they were, 20 years younger trying to work that style, it just, it won't work.
Well, the business has changed so much that today it's almost, it's spot wrestling now.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely spot wrestling now. So, when you smash your head and go down to the mat, you got a boring chant. We're back in the older days, when I'm talking about like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, it's like smashing the head and bringing them down. I don't even care to watch, certain matches today because it's such like a spot fest that I get a thrill when I watch Ricky Steamboat smash the head, run up the turnbuckles, and bring Ric Flair back down. The crowd pops off that.
Mm.
You'll never get a pop off that today. You have to do some crazy, some sort of crazy finish to a spot in order to get a good pop or do a dive over the top rope. And it's just and the fans are so smart now that when you smash the head and bring them down, they know it's a rest hold.
Yeah.
They're so smart now, and that's why you don't really see the hour time limit matches anymore unless it's like WWF putting on the Iron Man match or something like that. You don't really see that type of stuff anymore. You don't see people work matches, and when you work a match, there goes the longevity of your career. You can last a lot longer.
That reminds me, I saw Big Show do a bear hug last night.
For minutes on end.
Like a minute 31, I timed it. That was crazy.
Off the subject a little bit, I wanted to say one thing. I actually listened to your show, like I said, and I heard you ask pretty much during the time that it happened, almost every guest that you brought on, did they see the Sid Vicious break, the Sid Vicious and leg break?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And when I was in college, I was wrestling this guy, and he was a sparring partner of mine because I was varsity and he was a freshman. And he was a sparring partner, and we were just doing simple takedowns, and I'd gotten behind him, and, you can't do a soup or anything when you're in college. That's only in freestyle, so I was going to lift him up and bring him right back down to referee's position. Well, when I lifted him up, he planted his ankle sideways. So when I brought him down, his ankle just snapped in 3 places.
Oh.
And as soon as, it was the sickest thing I'd ever seen and felt, because when we had come down, I'd come down on top of him because it was just, coming down in the referee's position. When I come down, I felt his bones poking me in my stomach of his ankle. So I jumped off of him, and when I jumped off him, he fell to his back, and he lifted up his leg, and his ankle was just dangling. And that was the sickest thing I'd ever seen in my life until I saw Sid's break. In my life, I had never seen anything break that severely. Especially, you would expect the joint to break, the knee or the ankle or an elbow, something like that.
Okay.
I would never think right down the shin. That was the nastiest thing I'd ever seen. I just wanted to throw it out there that I'd seen something similar, but it was nowhere near as grotesque as that.